fundamentally, the idea of leveraging AI is to give you, some form of benefit. That could be time efficiency, could be revenue creation, generation, something which actually you can measure, you can see the impact being created. And this is nothing new. You tend to find technology is not the problem. It's usually the process, the culture, the people.
So, Darminder, welcome to the NeuralPod. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for your time and thanks for inviting me. Absolutely.
We've known each other going on 6-7 years now,
Yeah.
at least. I'll place you back into your role at Fujitsu, and your background is in data science AI, particularly in critical infrastructure and defense at Fujitsu, and since moved on to HCLTech around 10 months ago. Yeah, would you just like to give people a quick introduction to your background and your career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my sort of career started as an engineer way back in time, and I had the opportunity to do an engineering placement with Kinetic at the time, and they were doing some really good stuff and giving graduates new opportunities to come and work for them. So that sounded like a good idea, and it was kind of like my first stab at understanding, how to model the world around you in different ways. When I started off, data itself wasn't considered a very good asset. It was a nice to have. What to do with that data was still a question being asked at the time. So fast forward to now, you can fundamentally see the main differences. Everything with AI transformation, the need for good quality data, the need for understanding your data estate, all comes to play now. So I would say I've had a career which has taught me how to value data, and then basically how to extract value from data. And then you've got to tie it with a good question, a good use case to kind of deliver this impactful. So as I've kind of grown over the years, skill sets around how to articulate key messages, what those problem statements look like, what they are, how they should be defined. How do you communicate back those outcomes to your stakeholders, and then really work on delivering that through good data science and fundamentally, AI as well at the same time.
Yeah, the market's changing rapidly, I would say, every 6 months or so. And I think just to tie it back to some of what you said there, I think you've got an interesting career. You've done your doctorate at UCL, but then also studied LBS, and having that blend of research and also, as you say, asking the right questions. How has that business tied into your research background helped? You lead AI initiatives, particularly when dealing with stakeholders that are maybe not as technical as you.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity to actually learn some really good business skills at London Business School. So something along the lines of negotiation, change management, innovation, really taught me how to do certain things really well when it came to senior stakeholders. And fundamentally, you've got to be very clear up front about what you're trying to deliver with senior stakeholders. And how do you break down that technical knowledge, that technical understanding in layman terms is also very important. So having that kind of clear focus is really good up front, and that comes from a mix of both listening to your senior stakeholders, understanding their challenges, their pain points, and fundamentally trying to work on those bases to tie up your use case, what you're trying to propose, and how you're going to deliver that. Which is quite an interesting way of packaging all of that into, coming from a technical background, but understanding how to communicate for non-technical people. And I think you do need a blend of those mix of skills when you talk to people quite senior in enterprises.
Yeah, and I think your background, obviously, been at KPMG, Fujitsu, now HCL, huge consultancy aspect to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that, as you say, having that business acumen and combining it in a technically the right way is key. What do you think some of the common threads that would run through, your consultancy career and, working in places like Fujitsu and KPMG?
I think one of the key things you've got to realize is the ability to give you some flexibility when you come to sort of problem definitions and understanding what the challenge points are. You've got to present clear ideas and be innovative at the same time. I think a lot of senior stakeholders are interested in understanding what the state of the art might be. And you've got to base that on a vision on where they are now and where they want to get to. The other common thread is really having a really good team around you, I think, because as you'd understand, domain expertise is really, very important in this space. And my background is, as you know, you said it's coming from a public sector government sort of financial side. But if you're working in sectors which are unfamiliar to yourself, then you do need people who are going to give you knowledge around what those domains are, their knowledge around what it means, what are the cost drivers, what are the kind of the drivers that really impact those industries and those domains. So having that team around you to kind of give you that sort of visibility and education around those sectors are quite key.
Yeah.
To give you that backdrop.
And I think obviously you've progressed and you're now into quite a high level leadership position. There's lots of people who are trying to get into the market now, I think. But what advice could you give to potentially someone junior or who's would try and break into your team? What is it you look at?
I think when I'm sort of doing a lot of interviewing and interviewing candidates, what I'm looking for is more about someone who has got a growth mindset. So this space that we're in at the moment is going to be very fast changing. It's fundamentally going to transform the way that we deliver work and do work in the future. So we've got to embrace those coding generation tools, as you mentioned, or any type of AI tool, and understand how we can work with it to deliver better outcomes quickly and more efficiently. But one of the things which I think is really important as well is really defining what your USP is. And that's going to be very important. It's going to make a lot of us focus on key areas which we can really, really become better at doing things. And that's going to be a mix of both soft and technical skills. And for example, soft skills could be like anything to do with presentation. How do you network, for example? How do you present yourselves and how do you articulate ideas? Because AI will fundamentally deliver those answers that you're seeking far quickly. But it won't be able to step into a role where it will give you or present you in front of people. So that's kind of going to be very important. And I look for that kind of skill sets in candidates. They fundamentally have maybe done a small project or a pet project, which they've kind of understood how the AI gives you those benefits and articulated that and understood what those benefits are, and are able to communicate what those benefits are clearly. And as I said, growth mindset. I think we're all going to be under the radar here about how we grow ourselves in the future, and having that mindset about what can I do next? What's the next tool I can leverage? Is there something fundamentally different to how I've done something before? How can I change that in a different way that delivers a better outcome? So these kind of things which I think what we'll have is you'll have more time to do that in the future. And I think that's going to be very, very important.
You're moving on to AI in defense. I know it's a topic that maybe doesn't get as much of the limelight as other technologies and breakthroughs because, for various reasons, including confidentiality. But let's talk about that for a second. What unique challenges of deploying AI models in defense have you faced?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because one of the unique things about defense is that you have an ability to work on different types of AI problems for particular use cases. So everything from deploying AI at the edge to something which is more attuned to back office processes that you might find in an enterprise. And both types of deployment modes are quite different. The closer you move to the edge, the more isolated the AI becomes because of the lack of perhaps network connectivity, the environment that it's been deployed in, even to a point perhaps adversaries will be impacting those algorithms in some way. So all of those challenges present really, really interesting modes of working, and makes you think about how can I cater for those challenges in an efficient way. Fundamentally, it's all about giving the right answer to the right person at the right time so that they can make a decision. And if you go to the back office side, it's all about, in my view, how you can actually, and this is quite common in what we find in a lot of our enterprise use cases. Bringing an AI tool to someone is quite easy to do now. It's the idea of then how you can train that individual to leverage that tool efficiently, to give time back to that individual, to create those time efficiency savings. And it's a process transformation. So essentially, where you start to deliver a transformation in one area might create a bottleneck somewhere else in the enterprise, and that becomes apparent to a lot of people. Then we're not making as quickly as decisions we used to. Why is that the case? Even though we're speeding up the work further downstream. So I think a lot of when I was in defense, that change management, how you do that efficiently, how do you bring people along, and how you do that responsibly, so that the risks are also mitigated. Again, is quite a unique challenge, and that's kind of transferable to a lot of enterprise use cases now from that side.
Yeah, and we spoke about having the right data at the start of the podcast. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of defense is that, it's a highly complex and also confidential data.
Yeah.
How do you handle the data in the right way where there's lots of different considerations involved? And then the second part of the question is, how do you take people on that journey for you can have the best model and tool in the world, but if someone's not using it, then...
Fundamentally, the idea of leveraging AI is to give you, some form of benefit. That could be time efficiency, could be revenue creation, generation, something which actually you can measure. You can see the impact being created. But this is nothing new. A lot, you tend to find technology is not the problem. It's usually the process, the culture, the people in tune with this journey. And the challenge is that this technology is moving quite fast. There's always new innovation coming through. So a question for a lot of people is, how do we keep up with ourselves up to date with that pace? And what does it mean for enterprises? What kind of processes do they change? So that's kind of that cultural side, because you do need to move quite quickly and agile in this sense.
Yeah, because, let's say you adopted Copilot a year ago with advances with other tools. That may not be the best tool to use now. Do you see people adopting it, and then by the time they've adopted it, they've already been left behind?
A lot of enterprises have already made, or have made previously, historically, a lot of investment in the infrastructure that they want to use. So that could be either a Microsoft alignment, an AWS environment, or a GCP or Google environment. And for a lot of enterprises, that's usually quite a hard challenge to go and shift for something that you've necessarily invested a lot of time and effort and money in to move to something else. So you tend to find that the AI tools that are released in your ecosystem are the ones that you tend to leverage. So you mentioned Copilot, right? So when Copilot came out, I think everybody realized that it was something different. It might not be perhaps, and that depends on your use case, but at the end of the day, a lot of these tools which you're seeing in the marketplace are doing two things fundamentally. One is really focusing on and innovating around that customer experience, engagement, and making that tool as sticky as possible with users and the user base. And fundamentally, number two, leveraging those tools to actually learn about how users use those tools, and exploiting that data in that way to make further refinements and improvements. So it's a real mix, and I think what we'll see is as the models, the foundational models, become more and more intelligent, and we every foundational lab will tell you that they're aiming for some form of AGI, and definition of AGI is still not defined. But what we will see is more intelligence being baked into the model, which allows users to fundamentally apply their domain expertise and the tools with the model to deliver further work and further innovation. And I see that model. I would say that model is the emergence of that type of model is appearing now. Whether you're in your existing ecosystem or you're going to be using an OpenAI or a Claude or whatever, and the great use case where that model is now fundamentally being shifted and changed is everything to do with software engineering. The idea of how we develop software, prototype quickly, release features, has all changed considerably. Developers could be a one-man team, will have developer profiles doing everything from software generation to test and release. So as you can sort of see how that model could reflect any other type of enterprise process in the future. And this is why it's interesting why these foundational models are trying to get as much enterprise traction, use cases with their models as much as possible, because they know that's where their model will slowly replace maybe the other incumbents in this marketplace.
Yeah, I think that segues nicely into what you're working on now at HCL. A big part of that is AI transformation. Do you want to just reintro to people what kind of things you work on there and what kind of technologies your team work on and projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So at HCLTech, the AI labs are fundamentally front and frontier at everything with leading edge AI capabilities. And, the role that we have in the labs is fundamentally as a trusted advisor that we give to our clients. Clients come to us because they have a specific challenge, a pain point that they need to be solved. We're able to break down those barriers and unlock the value through a mix of both understanding perhaps the right level of technology to apply. And one of the benefits is that we're technology agnostic. We don't really drive a particular type of model or a type of ecosystem. Having the benefit of actually seeing what's happening across the whole of that piece, the whole of those marketplace, what's being released across different vendors and what's going to happen next, gives us the ability to move quite quickly and bring that sort of best of expertise to our clients so that they were able to make informed decisions in their value sort of transformation journey. So a couple of things that we're working on at the moment is fundamentally we're everything about trying to encourage our people within HCLTech think about how they can apply these new emerging AI coding tools or AI tools in their work. And we bring those use cases to kind of demonstrate to our colleagues how that can be done. We're also looking at sort of, that everything to do with how do we get now agentic AI into production. I think we've gone past the phase where a lot of our clients are doing pilots and experimentation. They're into the game of actually trying to scale and bring these agents to scale and productionize these solutions. So, and that presents us a different set of challenges, which we are now working with a lot of our clients on and understanding what those best practices are, because I think once you can sort of outline best practice, what does best practice look like, it becomes a framework that you can then communicate with and actually guide your clients on a journey with as well. So we're doing a lot of that interesting work at the moment, which is really, really, really good, because it's nice. It's interesting to see how you've done things before and how that can be changed by now the use of AI in delivering the same sort of similar outcomes.
Chatting to a mutual friend, actually, Gilbert from Accenture, is about a year ago, and he was talking about how with agents, he was looking at, a process, if it has, eight layers, 8 processes in 8 steps in that process, how they can knock out one of the processes with an agent. That was over a year ago. In terms of, agents, where do people start with it in terms of maximum ROI, I guess? Because a lot of people have experimented with it. I think it's an old stat, but Harvard Business School brought out a publication a few years back saying 80-90% of generative AI projects fail. Where do you see the biggest ROI with agents in terms of projects?
So I think it's a very interesting question, and I think you'll have a lot of people giving you different interpretations of what the answer might be. If we were to look at some of our really good use cases that have made a huge difference applying agentic AI to those use cases, they typically start from a process challenge, perhaps a part of that process which is acting like a bottleneck, for example. And you've got to understand how those processes essentially are linked together to deliver the end to end. So you've got to have very good visibility what the end to end process looks like. Those use cases which make the really good difference are the ones which do two things. One is they allow users to interact with the tool seamlessly. So one of the challenges typically when you use an AI agent is we need to sort of challenge our users, or perhaps to somehow articulate to our users that just don't use it as a very simple search engine or a chatbot. Think about how you can utilize your agent to deliver much more meaningful work to yourself. So, and you've got to have that construct in your mind about this is if I deliver a research article to my senior stakeholder, it involved me doing some research on the web. It involved me maybe looking at some of the insights. It involved me looking at trying to align those insights to really good KPIs that my senior stakeholders are looking for. And then senior stakeholders don't want a one-page brief. They want maybe a small paragraph that summarizes key insight and key and what that means for them as an individual or for their business. So I've just described to you 4 or 5 types of processes, and I think we can start to think about agents as being kind of like our co-creators in a way, where each of those 5 processes could be articulated via some sort of giving the agent some sort of good instructions to leverage it, the right data to look at. Perhaps some of their processes could be automated by running, very, very specific software functionality in the background. And then it's all about how you orchestrate that across the whole piece. And I think if there's one innovation where ROA has really made a difference, it's really where the orchestration has worked really well, because the orchestration has allowed my query, my prompt to be understood clearly and succinctly, and for it then to drive the relevant agents to go and deliver that outcome. And of course, it's not going to happen from the offset. It does require refinement. It does require a little bit of tuning. But I think the idea is that if you can get to a point where you can do that and actually measure that process runs repeatably and is accurate over and over again, it does 2 things. It delivers ROI, and it gives you that trust that you can give back to your user. And no, that trust is going to be very, very important when we get to a point where we can just leave these agents to work by themselves and not worry about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think with the invention of OpenClaw, trust and observability, and a lot of teams are focused on things like long horizon memory, where the agent can go off and do lots of different things without you knowing, and we're starting to see some good things, but also some horror stories from that.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a good point there. I mean, we started with a conversation around data. Now, the data requirements for agentic orchestration are slightly different from what we used to traditionally assume with, predictive analytics or machine learning. The need for an agent to remember what it was doing a minute ago compared to perhaps what's important to you over a longer time period requires 2 different data constructs. So how do you bring that into play? The question is also, it involves a little bit of different investment around what you put into play. And I think one of the good things is that a lot of the technologies that we've started to use, like for example, the vector databases for RAG, are still prevalent and applicable to the agentic layer as well, but just for a different purpose. And we've always had a difficulty finding the right use case for knowledge graphs, right? I had a really hard time trying to convince a lot of senior stakeholders that knowledge graphs would be a really good thing for them. Trying to connect their data into a relationship diagram with relationships there. And now you can see the use case for that is very prevalent in the agentic layer, because they need to understand how your data is connected and how it's relevant and how it links across a longer context. So, I think, agentic AI is kind of bringing all of these key facets of areas that we've all explored in our careers more and more, more prevalent type of way of working. So I think that's a good thing in my view.
Yeah, and for some organizations, agentic AI may be the 3rd step, and they're still yet to do the first step. And just tying it back to certain generative AI projects and agentic projects just fail. You're obviously someone who's been in the consultancy game for a while, and I'd like to think it's got the battle scars of implementation and pushing these things through into production. What are the biggest mistakes you see organizations make?
I wouldn't say there's a direct answer to this question, but a couple of things which I think have stood out. We've talked about the kind of like the change process management that needs to take place in conjunction with any sort of AI initiative, right? So that's going to be important. So I think you've got to understand where the AI will have the biggest impact, and that could be both an impact to people and an impact to how you deliver services. And fundamentally, every enterprise is doing this for 2 reasons: deliver better customer experience, or revenue creation and revenue generation. The other thing that I found is sometimes quite hard to do is really articulate what the problem is very, very, very well. And sometimes you do have conflicting ROI type KPIs that you need to measure against as well. So you've got to really zone in perhaps on and prioritize what those key KPIs are first before actually embarking on a project. And fundamentally, we come back to data, right? Do I have the right data to deliver that transformation? We mentioned defense. We did say that data is a challenge. It's the same thing with enterprise. A lot of data is siloed in different business units and business departments. So, how do I get that data connected? We grew up through a transition of trying to collect data and put it in one big place called a data lake, but that raised challenges around it became more expensive and very difficult to maintain. But now with the advent of, let's say, MCP, for example, with agentic AI, you can sort of leave data where it is and have a more distributed model, and allow MCP to connect to your data and how the agents query the right data when required. And what that's going to do is what we sort of call a data mesh architecture, working on very specific problems to their processes, and domain knowledge will be the custodians of their data for themselves. And then as long as an enterprise has a good governance model to make that data available for others to use, that's going to unlock a lot of value in the organization moving forward. So it's kind of like a theater, sort of starting at the business problem, the application layer, then moving downwards. And I've kind of articulated a couple of challenges along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing. And a question that comes to mind for me there is, security of these agents and how much of the organizations that you're dealing with thinking about, we touched on adversarial attacks earlier, and how much do people worry about an agent going off into their data or leaving it to do like a long task?
Yeah, and I did mention about the transformation that you bring being one of responsibility and risk mitigation. So you do need very good, effective guardrails. A classic example is not releasing personal identifiable information, for example, or getting personal information that's not relevant to the agent's process. So you've got to really put those checks and balances and guardrails in play. A lot of the agentic frameworks and technologies that allow you to develop and actually deploy agents have a very good core component within that does a lot of the guardrails and responsibility aspects with that. And similar to what we were talking about adversarial attacks, you still need an ability to do some form of red teaming against those agents in a safe sandbox environment that you can then really, really hit it with interesting edge use cases, right? Edge considerations, which really then allow you to understand, does that agent really perform well or not? Where the limitations might be, so you're able to kind of put risk-based scoring on it. That in this way could act as a way of doing some self-learning with agents, kind of driving that data back to kind of then give it a much more informed view of what's correct and what's not correct. But yeah, fundamentally, this is something which is a very core component, and that's going to be hugely driven by the regulatory landscape out there as well. AI services into different marketplaces geographically and both nationally as well.
Nice. I think that leads nicely onto the final part of the podcast, which is just talking about the future, and the change of pace seems to be getting more rapid, for every 6 months. But from a personal and even business perspective, what trends are exciting you the most right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you mentioned, OpenClaw, right? These orchestration frameworks, which are going from a place where we could give it a query and it understands how to essentially put a process in play to deliver your outcome. So I think we're getting to a point where we need to develop skill sets that can articulate our own domain expertise, the experience that we've built throughout our years of working, into artifacts that agents can understand now. So we look at everything that everybody leverages around agent skills, for example, as markdown files, right? We see people creating specific markdown files that describe their own personal profile or personality, the way that they communicate, the way that they want to articulate how they write information. All it is writing that down in a markdown file and allowing an agent to interpret that. So skills-based working, developing, articulating great skills, leveraging skills that can actually then improve how your agent performs is going to be really, really important, along with tools as well that the agent can use. And I think from a user perspective, it's trying to articulate the best way of understanding yourself. What is the right tool to use? What is the right skill to bring in? And then you can start to then play around with these concepts to kind of give you the best result that you're after, right? So I think that way of working is going to fundamentally change everybody's perspective of how they work with agents in the future. And as we say, as intelligence builds up within the foundational model, I think a lot of those capabilities might come into the foundational model. So we might be just a prompt away from work being given and done autonomously. One of the key things is that I think one of the areas which I think needs further refinement is everything that you provide an agent has to be the right context, the right level of information. That context is specific to your problem, your domain, your expertise. And that's something which we should hold on to as much as possible and refine, because I think that's going to be, moving forward, our key USP in the future of work, I think.
Nice. And from a personal perspective, are you using Dispatch or OpenClaw to in your personal life?
Yeah, so I've got my own OpenClaw running in my own laptop, not the enterprise laptop, but definitely working with OpenClaw, definitely leveraging all of the coding agent tools which are out there, Claude Code, Codex, for example. And as we start to use some of these tools, really understanding where certain tools give better benefit than others and how they sort of work in different ways. So I think, it's all about learning. I think we do need to be on the game of actually trying to keep ourselves continuously learning as new capabilities, new functionalities emerge in these new areas of work. So I think.
Yeah, and do you think that you hear a lot on the internet and through various quote unquote experts that we're not that far from autonomous employees? Do you think that is teams with augmented AI employees it is real and will be here soon?
I personally think it's moving in that direction. So digital avatars of certain work, certain colleagues, certain profiles is already here to some degree. And I guess it's really then a trust game, because if you can prove that your agents are going to be reliable and deliver the same outcome repeatedly over and over again, I think that's going to move us to that kind of trajectory going forward. I think we're still in that phase of understanding, how do we take agents to production? How do we make them reliable? How do we observe that they're delivering the right outcomes over and over again, and then communicating that across to users? So I think the trajectory is certainly there. I'm not going to put a time frame on that, but I think that's the general movement in that trajectory, no doubt.
Cool. And final question, I know intelligence and knowledge is becoming a bit of a commodity with all these tools, but are there any papers from a machine learning and AI perspective that have really challenged the way you've thought about the industry, or books that have shaped your leadership that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think any publication that talks to how you do change management efficiently and effectively is a good one, and there's a number out there. I think from a paper perspective, it's great to see how the open source community are competing with the kind of proprietary models which are out there. So a recent paper that came out where the Gemma models just has been released. It's now outperforming Quen models in certain task-based performance benchmarks. Just shows you how these models are competing with foundational models which are proprietary. So I think it's great to see those papers and that research being publicized, because it opens up opportunities to how you deploy and experiment with AI models in different ways. A great example would be if you're really concerned about data sensitivity and proprietary data, and you don't want it to leave your laptop, why don't you deploy a local model through something like an Alarma type framework and work on that data without worrying about it being pinged across an API. So if you're aware of what the leading open source models are, they might have the same equivalent performance to perhaps a Claude or an OpenAI. So I think that's one area that we should focus on a bit more.
Nice. Well, I'll include a link to the paper in the podcast, as well as your LinkedIn profiles and links to your work. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Darminder, and sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure to have you on at last.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Great to catch up, and likewise, it's been a good discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.